expanse of Ohio. Welcome back to Face the Nation.
Thanks, Margaret. Good morning.
Senator, we heard from Donald Trump this week that he wants to end all taxes on overtime pay for workers. How would this exemption work? Would this mean someone working a 40-hour work week would then not pay payroll taxes and not pay income taxes?
Well, that's exactly how he envisions it, of course. We're talking about hourly workers. And, of course, when you work overtime in this country beyond 40 hours, you get time and a half. And the president's saying if you're one of those select hard workers that's really busting your rear end to try to make good in Kamala Harris's economy, then you should get a tax cut. And I think it fits fully, Margaret, with his entire tax agenda, which is we want American workers to get tax cuts under President Trump's policies. And we want to actually penalize companies that are shipping jobs overseas through tariffs. And Kamala Harris's tax policies are, in fact, the inversion of that. She wants to raise taxes on American workers and actually reward companies for shipping jobs overseas. So it is a really stark contrast between the agenda of Donald Trump and of Kamala Harris.
Just to follow up on that, you said penalize companies who ship jobs overseas. So your tariff policy would only apply to those companies who are shipping jobs overseas?
Well, almost by definition, Margaret, when you apply a tariff, what you're really doing is applying a penalty to somebody who manufactures or makes something overseas. You're basically charging them a penalty to bring it back into our country. And so what we're trying to do here with these tariffs is actually induce more people to make more things in the United States of America. One of the great tragedies of not just Kamala Harris's leadership, but 40 years of American failure is that we've lost our critical manufacturing industries to Mexico, to China. We started to undo that for 4 years under Donald Trump's leadership, but we've got to do it for much longer and in a much more intense way, because as we've learned just in the last few days, the world has gotten more dangerous. We can't rely on other people to make the stuff we need.
It's cheaper to manufacture overseas, which is why so many companies do it. But that's another issue. Just to follow up on the promise you're making to working class voters, you are now saying no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on income from Social Security. All of that would wipe out a big chunk of the tax base. Do you really think that fiscally conservative Republicans in Congress are going to vote for this?
Well, I think obviously Republicans believe American workers should keep more of their own money. And yes, I think that if we actually balance this out by penalizing some of these companies for manufacturing overseas, I do think that we can get this to balance out in the right way, Margaret, where we're not blowing a hole in the deficit. We're giving workers more of their money. But to your point, we're actually making it easier to make things in the United States of America. Now, you're exactly right. Sometimes it is a little bit cheaper to manufacture overseas, but we have to ask why that is. It's because a lot of these foreign countries use literal slave labor in manufacturing. We should not be allowing slave laborers to benefit from American markets. If you want access to our market, you've got to pay our workers fair wages. That is the Trump agenda, and it's something he already implemented once, by the way, Margaret, but is going to double down on in his second term.
So the 10 to 60% tariffs, you're saying this is just a range, and you'll figure out exactly who it applies to if you win the election?
Well, I think you have to take some recognition, Margaret, that this is a negotiating tactic. You go into some of these negotiations, and sometimes you're going to have to do higher tariffs. Sometimes you might be able to do lower tariffs, but I don't think you go in saying you're going to do exactly this on every country. You use that as part of the negotiation. This is one thing that Donald Trump was so good at during his first term, is actually negotiating with foreign countries and benefiting American workers in the process. Well, if you say you're not going to do any tariffs, you're basically going into these trade negotiations completely unilaterally disarmed. You don't want somebody who's negotiating for American workers who's already saying, I'm not going to use the most important tool, which is exactly what Kamala Harris has done.
Well, Harris and Biden have used tariffs in strategic ways on strategic industries, and it sounds like you're saying you'll also be strategic there. You represent Ohio here in Washington, and